Hi, my love, and welcome to the live. Now, before we start today, I just want to let you know that this topic might be a tiny bit triggering or a lot triggering, depending on where you're at in your healing journey. So just be mindful of your environment, and if you've got time to process any emotions that might come up, or maybe it might be best to watch the video at another time. So just feel that out before we dive in. And if you have any questions as we're going through, please feel free to drop them in the comments, or you can send them through to me on Messenger as well if they're a bit more private in nature. As today we're talking about sexual addiction and the link with, we're talking about sexual trauma and the link with addiction. So first of all, just talking about what sexual trauma actually is, because I think there's a bit of a misconception to tackle here. Because sexual trauma definitely goes all the way up to non-consensual penetration, but it can be down at a different end of the scale where we're maybe in a relationship where we're not prioritizing our pleasure, so we're allowing our partner to have sex with us in a way that doesn't feel good, and that might even be, through no malintention from your partner. It might just be they've watched porn all of their lives and think that this is the way to do things. And maybe you have as well, and think that, you're meant to be able to take this crazy amount of penetration or pain or whatever it is. But actually, if you were true to yourself or honoring yourself, it might be a little different the way that you'd actually want to have sex with your partner. So just really expanding this into really any sexual interaction that doesn't feel good can be traumatizing, even if we don't realize it at the time, and it's something we realize a couple of years down the later, like, hey, that actually was pretty messed up, but I've only now kind of got the awareness of that. So just making sure not to compare your story to other people's, and if you feel like there's tension and trauma trapped down there in your yoni, then no one's to say that that's wrong or right. It doesn't matter what you've experienced, it's your interpretation of the situation. And that's something really important to highlight with trauma as well, is that different people will respond to the same event differently depending on what's going on in their lives, their support structure, or just how they generally felt about the situation as well. It might be enjoyable for one person and traumatic for another person. So all of these things to consider, and just opening up maybe to the possibility that there could be a little bit of trauma in your yoni when maybe you've not even realised, or maybe you're fully aware and wanting to tackle that as well. So what does sexual trauma actually do to the body and to the mind? Well, this is a very typical framework, and this might not be your exact experience, but when we go through a traumatic situation, we'll often disassociate either or during the event and sometimes afterwards as well. So dissociating in this context is where we ignore our thoughts, feelings, environment, sensations in the body, and we kind of disconnect the mind and body completely, and we reach this other state of consciousness where those things aren't so taxing on us. And it often happens because at the time of the event or afterwards, the emotions or the physical pain is too much for the body to handle, so it goes almost into this survival response. And that's something I really want to highlight as well, is that dissociating isn't a weakness. It's something we're kind of programmed to do to protect us, so that we can keep moving away from the dangerous situation without getting too wrapped up in the pain that we're experiencing, whether that's mental or physical. This is happening because it's, too painful to process at the time, and that's more than okay. And the problem sometimes is that after the traumatic experience has ceased, the mind and the body can become trapped in this state of dissociation, or can be triggered into dissociating by various stimuli. It could be anything that triggers you to go back into that state of separating from the mind and body. And also bringing in hypervigilance as well, where we're like constantly on the lookout for a threat and experiencing a lot of anxiety because of that, which leads to all kinds of health problems as well. So this does affect our women's health too. So when this trauma is sexual in nature, these triggers tend to be in more of a sexual context, or will disassociate maybe during a sexual interaction. There also can be some numbness within the vagina itself. And again, that's kind of a protective thing. If there's been a lot of rough sex, it desensitizes in order to protect us from that overwhelming sensation. And similarly, there can be pain in the vaginal walls as well, like really tensed up areas that are just waiting for something to happen and need to relax a little bit. And it can also manifest physically in, really strongly in things like period pain and PMS. Has a really strong link with sexual trauma. And it can also be things like vaginal infections or even menstrual disorders like PMDD, endometriosis. And that's not to say that sexual trauma is the only cause of all of those things. It's just something that could be contributing or could have been the root cause, and then other things have compounded on top. Okay, so that's kind of what sexual trauma does to the body and to the mind. So now linking this to addiction. So roughly 50% of people that experience trauma will then struggle with substance addiction. So if that's you, just know that you're completely not alone. It's a very common response. In fact, I had the exact same response, and I've come through that now. But yeah, it's very, very common. So I'm going to explain why. And the idea is that we've got these really intense emotions and trauma that we haven't processed, and we're trying to distract the mind, or take it to another level of consciousness, another area of consciousness in the mind where thoughts and emotions aren't so painful. So, with alcohol, it kind of numbs those feelings a little bit, or the same with cannabis, those emotions aren't so intense. And we can sometimes process things on a different level with that as well. So I just want to highlight that, any kind of substance addiction or behavioral addiction as well comes in as a coping mechanism to help us survive. So it does actually serve a purpose at the time, even though it might be, not a particularly healthy substance or behavior that we're engaging in. It's still serving a purpose to protect us. So I don't want us to feel too bad about the fact that, we are addicted to this substance or behavior, because it really is just helping us to keep moving forward. But that being said, there does come a time where we do have to face these emotions and process them and get them out of the body. And that might not be possible until we've got some other coping mechanisms in place. So that addiction or the substance or the behavior might almost in a sense need to keep going for a little bit until we can bring in some other methods that are going to help us to process our emotions. And then the reliance on that addiction gradually reduces, because we've got all these other things that are helping us to slowly filter the trauma out of the body, and just release it really. And then the addiction just becomes less and less, and it becomes more of a habitual thing that we have to tackle instead of a coping mechanism to deal with this really heavy traumatic experience that we've been through. So yeah, this journey of processing your emotions and finding different coping mechanisms in order to move away from addiction and release that sexual trauma is going to be completely unique to every single person. And I would say, honestly, for me, it was really important to have some support there. It wasn't something I could do 100% by myself. And I think I would recommend to anyone, really, if this is something that you're struggling with, to reach out to either a professional that knows how to deal with these things like myself, or someone else that you feel more drawn to, like traditional psychotherapy, if that's more up your street. or even reaching out to friends and family as well and just letting them know what's going on, what you're dealing with, even showing them this video so they can understand why there's this link between the behaviour you're doing now and something that's happened in the past. And just helping people to understand and support you, hold your hand, hold you accountable to finding these new coping mechanisms. And that's, you know, a huge part of the work that I do with my clients. But as I say, this journey is unique for everyone. So it might be fabulous for us to work together, and it might be fabulous for you to work with someone else as well. But if you are interested, feel free to reach out to me and we can have a chat and see if we're a good fit for each other. Otherwise, I'll refer you to maybe a different type of practitioner that might work better for you. Okay, that's it really. If you do have any more questions, drop them in the comments, shoot them through to me. And next week, I'm going to be diving into a little bit deeper how to push these addictions into the last chapter of your life and move on to a new chapter. So I'll be talking about why you need to stop trying to quit smoking. That's going to be the topic of next week. All right, thank you so much. I'll be here at the same time, sending you lots of love and support. Bye for now.